Hi. Hey,
Hi
everyone.
there. All right, so here we are for our February Affordable Housing Advisory Committee meeting. I think we are ready to start. Roll call, I am positive is done. Matt Martino might be joining us. I don't see him yet, but welcome. So good to see everyone. And I hope everyone is feeling better. If they've been under the weather, it seems like the majority of the population has been. So it's good to see everyone. And it's so nice to see the sunshine today. Did everyone have a chance to review the January minutes? And again, I love the format. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
If everyone has had a chance to review the minutes, if someone would like to do a motion to approve the minutes, you may go ahead.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. I think Heather did the motion, and then was it Allison who did the second? Thank you. Any additional discussion on the minutes? All right, I'm not seeing any hands raised, so a vote to approve the minutes, raise your hand and I'll list the names. For an aye, I have Keith Wooden, Joanna, Heather, Allison, Kathy, Cindy, Ian. I think that's everyone. I don't see Matt yet, so all approved. Thank you so much. So we have what appears to be a short agenda for the meeting today, but we have a lot to cover. So Rachel, would you like to start in with the CDBG 2022 Annual Action Plan draft?
So yesterday you all should have received that draft. We will have a public hearing on it at our next AHAC meeting. So I want to make sure you all have a chance to review it. There'll probably be some typos addressed between now and then. But other than that, this is the annual action plan for the most part. You will notice that there is different funding than possibly you saw what was recommended or allocated, and that's just based on the contingencies that you provided with regards to program income. In addition, these are all still just estimates. We haven't got what those final dollar award amount is from HUD, and we won't know that until probably the end of March, beginning of April. So those numbers will fluctuate slightly with regards to what gets presented to council in April. And that's all that I have for you. But thanks so much, and I hope you have a chance to kind of really dig into the annual action plan. And if you have any comments or concerns, don't hesitate to reach out to me.
Rachel, when is the final report due?
So it goes before you all at a public hearing in March. It will go in front of council for final approval in April, and we submit it to HUD the second week of May.
So I don't know if any of you noticed, and Rachel, correct me if I say this wrong, but I think this is the first time we've been able to fully fund the services requests with the funding that we had. Maybe Councillor Campbell can even go back. She's been a liaison for a while, but it's very nice to be able to fund the full asks. That was nice. And then when you review this funding, you'll see that Shepherd's House, because we discussed a contingency with any additional funds that come in, the number for them is larger than what they applied for in the application process, because we had the contingency. If there's any remaining funds, it would go directly to that. So additional funding for Shepherd's House is, I think, just a huge positive. So thanks for putting that together, Amy and Rachel. And again, if anyone has any questions, just let staff know.
And I'll just clarify,
Yes.
They asked for a great deal amount of money, but I think that's based on like their budget.
Right.
But we were able to award them more than at your last deliberation. So you'll notice that increase. So
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I got so excited, I just muddled my words. So terrific.
Chair, if I can just add, I think
yes.
This report, besides it being a required activity, I think it's just helpful. It helps me personally get grounded in our work and what we're doing in the city. And I think, whereas I read this last year, I didn't have sort of the same aha about this, but I think I'll use this going forward as I get questions about AHAC and what is our scope and what are we working on, and and by extension, what is the city working on? And so I just am expressing that I'm really appreciative of that document and the multiple purposes that it serves. So
Yes, it really outlines the work that we do in a 38-page succinct format. It's very helpful and required. So if there's no additional questions on the draft, we'll go to the next agenda item, which is just a debrief of the funding process. And many of you were responded to the survey that was sent out. If I stumble on this, Rachel, bail me out. We didn't notice any comments to make any perhaps drastic changes to the scoring and what we do. There were some comments provided. Does anyone here on the committee want to share any thoughts they've had since they either took the survey or reviewed the scoring page? And I think Rachel, she can put it up on the screen if we wanted to look at it again, or if the committee is happy with where we're at, we can leave it at that as well. So I'll look for a raise of hands or any discussion. Feel free, don't be shy. I don't see any hands raised. Wow. Okay, Rachel, make sure I'm not missing anything, but thank you for answering those questions. And we've done some fine tuning to the scoring sheets over the years, and I think it's been very helpful. So appreciate you guys' input on the survey. So now we have Carolyn Egan here and Elizabeth to review the Martin versus Boise and the city's response to homelessness. I think they have some presentations for us, which are very timely. I'm really looking forward to this. I'm not sure who is going to go first. So Lynn or Rachel, take it away and introduce in the order that they want to go.
I think I can do the introduction if that's okay, Rachel, unless you were eager. Okay. So I think I'm really so pleased to have this discussion here today, because I think, the community has heard a lot in little segments about what the city is doing around our houseless population, what we can do, what we can't do, things like that. And we thought that this was the appropriate time to maybe have a larger discussion about sort of the legal framework that we are operating within and how we are implementing our strategy within that legal framework, and to allow all of you as sort of ambassadors to the city to understand, hopefully, why we're making the decisions that we're making. We're not expecting you to go forth and stand in front of angry crowds, out in the community if that's what you find, but do want you to at least know why we're making the decisions that we're making. So with that, we have kind of a two-phase presentation today. Elizabeth Oshel, as you all know, is one of our amazing city attorneys, and she has really been, I'd say, boots on the ground with this issue through her time at the city. And then and she's going to really present the legal framework aspect of this. You all are welcome to ask questions. Elizabeth, you can say at the beginning whether you'd like those to hold till the end or not. And then Carolyn Egan is here. Carolyn has a new title that I can never remember, but more or less she is our strategy and recovery officer, something along those lines. Hopefully I'm not butchering it too bad. And she will talk about how we are implementing the city strategy within the legal framework that we have. I just was able to get a quick note from our police chief, who may be able to jump in also in case there are questions that you all have that might be more appropriate for him. Hopefully he will be able to join us, but it was a very last minute request. So we may have to just sort of drag our feet a little so that he can make it on time. But really eager to have you all participate in this discussion, ask questions that you may have, etc. And we'll see where we go from here. With that, I will hand it over to Rachel or Amy. Did you want to say anything else before I hand it off to Elizabeth? Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here.
Sure, thank you, Lynn. So I've seen you all before, but just for formality's sake, Elizabeth Oshel, I am one of the assistant city attorneys. And I think Rachel sent you a memo that sort of outlines the topic for today. Just have a short presentation, and I told Rachel I would drive, which means I have to figure this out on my own. Let's see. How is that? Now I can't see you. Can you see that? Oh, no, not yet. Okay. Can you see that?
Yep, looks
Okay.
perfect.
Thank you. All right, and I can see you. So here we go. So I'm here to talk to you, as the memo outlined, about a case called Martin v. Boise and how that is sort of providing the framework for the city's response to homelessness. And I'm not a law professor, and I will try to neither make this too high level or too detailed for you as we go into the case law. But first, I wanted to start, as the memo starts, with the basic premise that being houseless, being without a home, is not a crime, and the city does not ban camping outright on public property or in public rights of way. The city code does ban obstructing right of way, and rights of way are public streets, public sidewalks, public roadways. So the city bans obstruction of those rights of way or sidewalks and constructing or storing materials in the right of way. But as always, enforcement of city laws must comply with state and federal law. And I'll get into those now. So starting with the federal level, there's a case called Martin v. Boise, which is a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals case out of Boise, Idaho. And then that case was followed in Oregon, in the District of Oregon, by a case called Blake v. Grants Pass. And the Supreme Court has declined to hear the Ninth Circuit case, which means it stays, and that is the law of the land in the Ninth Circuit, which is the West Coast, essentially. And so basically what the Martin v. Boise case held is that it is unconstitutional to fine or criminally cite homeless people for sleeping on public property when there's not enough shelter spaces available within a city. This is based on the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment that bars a city from prosecuting people criminally for sleeping outside on public property when those people have no home or other shelter to go. And so again, the courts have said, if there's not enough shelter spaces, then essentially people who are homeless within a city have no choice but to sleep outside, in many cases on public lands. It's important to note Martin v. Boise does, in a footnote, say its holding does allow reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on sleeping and camping in public places. And Martin v. Boise is from 2019, but it actually reinstates essentially a rule that was first set out in the Ninth Circuit from a case in LA in 2007. That case was vacated, so it was sort of the law, but not the enforceable law in the Ninth Circuit. And then Martin v. Boise brought much of the reasoning back. So this is a new case, but not necessarily a new rule. And then again, without diving too deeply into the legal background, I did just want to give some of the perspective. The basis of the analysis under the Eighth Amendment prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment dates to two cases from the 1960s and 70s, where the Supreme Court found it is cruel and unusual punishment to criminalize a person's status. First, the Supreme Court looked at I believe it was a California law that criminalized the being a drug addict, a person with a drug addiction being within city limits was a crime. And the court said that's not allowed under the Eighth Amendment. The second case found it's okay to criminalize public drunkenness, but essentially the Eighth Amendment prohibits criminalization of a person's status. And that's been applied to through the Martin v. Boise case to laws criminalizing sleeping outside. Again, if people have to sleep and there's not enough shelter spaces, people who are houseless have to sleep outside. And so that brings us to the rule. You can't penalize for sleeping outside in public when there's not sufficient shelter beds in a city. And I can't see everybody's face, Lynn. So if there are questions, I know this is a high level but highly technical kind of conversation. So please, if you have questions, throw a hand up, and if someone can, or just unmute yourself and start to talk, and hopefully I'll hear you and you can ask your question.
Elizabeth, it looked like Cindy did have one question just now, if
Okay,
that's okay.
thank you.
Yeah, since you just opened it up. So I guess maybe my question is twofold. So who, and I don't want this to come off the wrong way, who decides how many shelter beds need to be available to meet a community's needs? Like, is there a magic number of a city needing to have X amount of beds to meet the shelter requirements? And then what happens if there are like drug sales or drug abuse in that regard in these situations? Like what happens then?
Sure. So on your first question, the way the Martin case and the city of Boise approached it was, is there a space in a shelter bed for this person who is facing a citation or a criminal charge? So in the Boise case, one of the people who had been cited had been staying at the city's shelters, but had exhausted all the time available. So he had stayed for 17 days at the shelter that allowed people to stay for 17 days. He had stayed for the length of time allowed at the other shelter. And I believe in the third shelter, in order to stay longer, he had to participate in religious services, and he didn't want to do that. And so the court said he couldn't be compelled to participate in religious services, and there was not a bed available to him. So it's actually a somewhat difficult rule to apply on the ground. If what the courts are asking cities to do is make a person-by-person, case-by-case analysis, does this person have another bed available to them? And, we're looking at the way this case has been applied in other cities and other states throughout the Ninth Circuit to try and come up with operational guidelines of how does this apply. But it really is a question of, do folks in your city have another bed to choose?
And what if they refuse to accept the sleeping arrangement or the location?
So the cases look at, is there another option available? So that's really the question, is the bed available to this person so that the court can assume they've made a choice not to use that bed, but to be on the street. And that's where you get out of the Eighth Amendment question.
Right.
So the bed has to be available.
Okay. And if they refuse the availability of the bed, is there case law on that or more information on that? I know I'm kind of digging in the weeds.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's where the rubber hits the road. And there's not, that I'm aware of, specific case law answering that question. There was a bed available. Someone said, I don't want to go there. Now what happens? We don't have a case that sets out that rule for us.
Okay.
So what happens when we have case law is we take what happened in one situation, what's the rule that the court established based on those particular facts, and then that's why we're here, is to say, well, how does that rule apply in our facts or in the next situation? And as you have more case law, you get to build out a clearer picture of how the court wants the rule to be applied in every situation. But this is a pre-existing rule, but it was in this sort of limbo position for 12 years, and now it's back. So we're building that case law to help us flesh out that picture. But right now we have the words of the Martin v. Boise case that we must follow, and the interpretation from Grants Pass, which is also important for us to consider, so that if there's not enough shelter space for the particular person, then the court is saying they're not making a choice. And then you're looking at a status problem.
Sorry, Elizabeth, I wanted to let you know, because I know you can't see all the little people on the screen, that our Police Chief Mike Krantz is here and probably available to be back up to you.
Great.
There are sort of procedural questions that he may be able to answer about how we're implementing some of this stuff. So just wanted to let you know that Mike Krantz is here. Chief Krantz, thank you for attending. That was a very last minute invite, but really appreciate you kind of dropping everything and coming over. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So Elizabeth, what if there's drug activity that's not covered by the Eighth Amendment?
Mhm. So these, as your kind of question points out, these cases apply to citations for the act of camping or sleeping outside on public places. If there's other criminal activity taking place, these cases don't address that. So I know there was a ballot measure recently in Oregon relating to decriminalization of drug possession in certain cases, and I'll turn it over to Chief Krantz if he's ready to give some of the perspective on enforcement of those other crimes or citations for drug possession.
Sure. Thank you. So I've caught part of that last question in communication. I think I got the general gist, and I can pretty much answer through these, but feel free to stop me or ask me more clarifying questions until I get it right. So thanks for having me and meeting a lot of you for the first time, I think. But drug cases. So ballot measure 110 has changed a lot of responsive and really work of law enforcement around drug specific possession. So really what it has done is decriminalize user amounts, and each drug has a specific amount, 5 grams, 10 grams, under a certain amount that would be considered user amounts in most cases. Has decriminalized that to a violation level. So that changes a lot of our abilities as law enforcement, as well as we understand the intent. So in law enforcement, we really understand the intent is to address addiction as a public health crisis, not as a criminal piece where we want to see people in prison or behind bars for it, for a couple reasons. I think as we can all look at, addiction truly is a medical issue more than a criminal issue for police to solve. Treatment and corrective behavior and change of lifestyle is a lot cheaper than prison. We need those services available more in the state. So, but as far as our response, what do we do around it is that has changed the ability for us to use what we would normally have used for reasonable suspicion or probable cause for criminal activity to engage and then take enforcement action to a violation level, to where we then write a ticket, just like a speeding ticket almost, where it's a violation. It's $100 fine in the state. If people choose not to pay it, they have a choice where they can call a number for an assessment, a drug assessment. They can call the number and then hang up. All they have to do is simply call the number, and then basically it's dismissed as if it didn't exist. So it really is not a big tool for law enforcement anymore. What you've seen over the last year since ballot measure 110 came into place is a significant decrease of law enforcement engaging in activities around drug use, because it takes more time and effort, I think, for a lot of agencies to do the work than the outcome. Basically, giving the person who is going through an addiction disorder on the corner a citation doesn't change the circumstance. It doesn't allow anything from law enforcement to do. It just gives them a citation. So we rather refer them to treatment, refer them to one of the many social service partners we have here to really get that on their own when they make that choice. As if anyone knows around, has any people or family members or friends who have been through the addiction disorder, it really is a point where they have to decide. A citation from a police officer is not going to change mostly 99% of the time, not going to change their outlook on their addiction at the time. So that it prohibits a lot of our enforcement around, like if you see, I think what the question was something about, why are drugs laws just enforced at campus sites? Is that generally kind of the gist of what I'm getting? I think. And that's why, because it's not, now if we see distribution, that's a different story. We will definitely follow up on distribution and felony level cases that affect the community as a whole, and have people who are involved in preying on people with addiction disorders. So that's where we put a lot more of our effort into the people who have more impact in the community when they're distributing drugs.
Yeah, and that was the crux of my question, and you jumped in like right when I was asking it, so you missed it, but you winged it very well. Thank you so much again for joining us. And so that answers my questions. I saw Heather's hand up, and now I just see Councillor Campbell's hand up. So I was going to take this opportunity to, I'll call on Councillor Campbell first, and then Heather, if your hand is still raised, you certainly address your question. So Councillor Campbell, please.
Thank you so much. And I also want to say thank you to the chief for being here today, and just the entire police department. They have been remarkable, and it's just such a difficult place where we are right now. I kind of think of it as an uneasy truce, and the police are in the middle. So just so much appreciation to them. And then Elizabeth, my question is related, but not on this particular. So maybe you want to tell me at a different time. I'm wondering about the case from Medford. I thought that Medford had been sued regarding folks sleeping in the parks. If you wanted to spend just a minute on that as well.
Sure. I didn't review the Medford case before this meeting, so I don't have all the facts. I think Medford had adopted a new code relating to camping on public property, and that code is being challenged as to whether it conforms to Martin v. Boise and Blake v. Grants Pass. So I don't believe that case has proceeded very far. They're still in the sort of document trading stage. So we don't have an outcome or an order that would help us from that case yet.
Thank you. That's interesting. So that one is in fact still related to Boise. Boise was the first one. Grants Pass was an appeal of Boise. And now Medford is also an appeal?
Not really. So Martin v. Boise was decided, and that becomes the law in the Ninth Circuit. Grants Pass was a subsequent case. So the Martin v. Boise was a person named with the last name of Martin suing the city of Boise. The Grants Pass case was a person with the last name of Blake suing the city of Grants Pass, applying the rule from Martin v. Boise. And so the same would be happening in Medford, where a person in Medford is challenging the Medford code as to whether it meets the rule of Martin v. Boise.
Thank you so much. You're doing a great job as a law professor today. I appreciate it.
It's easy for us to forget how much we had to learn our first year of how all of this fits together. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Was there another question, or should I?
There is another question, Heather Simmons. Yes, hold on. You got the floor, Heather.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm curious, is the city aware of other cities that have actually achieved enough shelter spaces such that those who are sleeping or camping in public spaces are doing so truly from a place of choice?
So I think the approach more cities are taking that I'm aware of is coming to a place of a code that allows sleeping in certain circumstances. So developing those time, place, and manner restrictions. So for example, I was looking at codes earlier today that allow sleeping in certain places in public from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., but not in other places at any time, and then not during the day. So I think that's more the approach cities have taken, is to try and meet that reasonable time, place, and manner restriction provision, rather than being able to demonstrate at all times there are shelter beds available.
Yeah, that makes sense. It seems like a daunting and maybe impossible task to, at any given point, have enough shelter beds.
It's been an interesting legal puzzle to figure out how that works. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think those are all the questions at this point. Lynn and Rachel, help me look at the screen as well. But Elizabeth, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. These are great questions and a good discussion. So the next level of law to think about complying with when we are applying our city ordinances is state law. And in Oregon, there's a statute. This has been a statute for, I think, about 30 years that requires policies for cities and counties. And the policy is developed and adopted at the local level. This policy is required by statute to recognize the social nature of the problem of homelessness. And the statute requires that policy to set out how cities respond and remove established campsites from public property. And the statute requires that the policy provide at least a 72-hour notice before a city removes an established campsite from public property, and that any property collected during that removal is stored for at least 30 days and made available for folks to come retrieve. So we have that policy in the city of Bend, and I'll get to that on the next slide. The other state law that's important to be aware of is called House Bill 3115, and this was adopted last year. This requires going forward that local laws regulating sitting, lying, sleeping, or keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property open to the public must be objectively reasonable as to time, place, and manner. So that is the state attempting to put into statute the rule that we were just discussing from Martin v. Boise. When cities and counties adopt codes that regulate sitting, lying, sleeping, keeping warm and dry outdoors on public property, those rules have to be reasonable as to the time, place, and manner of what they're allowing or disallowing. So again, this is a rule that, we have our words, and words are imperfect for describing operationally what does that mean. So we're looking at the codes from other cities that are like Medford, as Councilor Campbell mentioned, and other cities around the state. What are those reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions? And those are going to depend on the context of the city, what property is available, what shelter space is available, et cetera.
Hey, Elizabeth, I had one question related to the place piece that you're talking about. So in theory, I know that the city's talked a lot about finding a spot for a camp or for something else. And so in theory, if the city's successful and finds this in the next year and they establish some spot, does that mean that is the spot that everybody has to go? That you can kind of, if Mike's team finds somebody that's in some other place, but there is a spot at this established camp, is that where you can check the box and say, yes, everybody can, through this ordinance, be moved to this new site? Is that, am I reading that correctly? Has anybody done that?
So that's, sorry.
Oh, no, I mean, that seems like, especially if the site was big enough, that would be a path, but I'm sure it's wrought with a lot of landmines. I'm seeing Mike kind of the chief kind of, it's so anyway, that was what came to my mind. So that was the question I had.
So the way that this place restriction has been, I think, interpreted is more, we could say, for example, the middle of the road, not a good place. The middle of the sidewalk, not a good place. Next to the river, not a good place. So that's really more generally speaking, what places might be available or not available for camping. It's not, to my knowledge, been used to say there is one place and one place only, and certainly hasn't been used to move people to a particular place. I think, there's complications about the way, we can't necessarily direct or force everyone to go to one particular place. We have other enforcement tools that are easier to say you can't be here, rather than saying you must be somewhere else. We don't forcibly move people to one particular place, I guess I'll say.
Gotcha. Thanks, Elizabeth.
And Chief, did you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think, when you really look around time, place, and manner, it's been used several different ways, right? And I think your most recent example is Mayor Wheeler in Portland on place, right? He's restricting camping along he's establishing as busy roadways, mostly because 70% of the pedestrian fatalities last year they discovered were homeless people. So obviously they are having a objectively reasonable facts to establish that camping along roadways are going to be managed, busy roadways are going to be managed by place, right? Time management, you can manage, like what Elizabeth has said about, it's okay to sleep between 8 p.m. and 8 a.m., but you can't be in this area sleeping other than that. Manner, Portland did a ordinance that the manner of campings, for instance, they had a rule in place when they established manner that you couldn't have property with you outside of your wingspan. So that way it restricted, endless block long of property that people sometimes set up. So there's just a number of restrictions, but they really have to be reasonable and have a reason behind them, and objectionable, and defendable. Really.
Thank you, Chief. That's helpful. I think, the discussion about what's a reasonable manner restriction, goes back to what I was saying, that it depends on what is going on in your town, right? Where it snows, you may have different reasonable manner restrictions than if we were in Florida, right? Those are going to be different reasonable ways people might need to camp, right, to protect themselves from the elements. So thank you. That was good examples of time, place, and manner.
Elizabeth, Kathy Austin has her hand raised, so we have another question.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for moderating.
Thank you. I have more of a question. Maybe one of the planners could actually address more, but I'm assuming this only refers to public property. So if people were camping on a vacant lot, but that lot is owned by someone, they don't necessarily have a right to be on someone's property. I'm used to property lines going up to the back of sidewalk, and sometimes the sidewalks even within the property. So explain to me, like on 2nd Street or one of the other streets that people have been camping on, what's the public part that they're on?
Thanks, Kathy. I don't know if we have a planner on, so I'll take a stab at this. But so the rules are directed at public property. And as you can see in House Bill 3115, that's public property open to the public. And so the right of way typically includes the sidewalk. And it really is not an easy answer to draw a straight line or tell you in every area of town, the right of way line is the edge of the sidewalk or is 3 feet from the edge of the sidewalk. Even on a different block face, it can be different property by property. So the right of way in particular is hard to have a bright line of what is or is not public property. And I think in other places, you see those time, place, and manner restrictions being applied to all rights of way. And some cities have opted to say no camping at any time on any road or sidewalk, because they have been able to point in their code to other places that they think will withstand scrutiny if challenged in the court. So it's not an easy answer. Sometimes sidewalks are required to be built property tight, where the property line would be at the back of the sidewalk. Sometimes sidewalks have been required to be built curb tight, where there's a gap of right of way between the back of the sidewalk line and the private property line. So there's not a blanket rule that can be applied.
Yeah, I'm just trying to envision. I've done a lot of subdivisions and worked with public utility easements, but those are within the property, and so I'm just having a hard time visualizing what public property is being used along some of these streets. It seems like the idea is to push people more towards parks or, someplace that is more open. And it's why we see a lot of people along the parkway or, in slopes like that. So I don't know, it's not that germane, but I just wondering where public spaces are that these folks can go that isn't spilling over into where people need to walk or drive. I don't know.
Yeah, that is certainly, it's going to be a puzzle, and I'll get to what that process might look like to answer some of those questions in Bend later in the slides. So, but thank you for the question. It's all of these raise very interesting issues that don't have clear answers.
I think we're good right now. So Elizabeth, you can proceed.
Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate it. So moving from state law to what the city can do. And as I said earlier, we do have an administrative policy that was written in compliance with those state laws we were just describing, providing the framework for how the city enforces the ordinances we do have and manages established campsites in the right of way. So this policy provides the framework for that, provides for management tools first, providing trash services, attempting to keep clear passageways on roads and sidewalks, those clear vision areas so that traffic can safely pass through, and keeping tents and campsites away from travel lanes, and managing debris and garbage and on all those kinds of things. However, if those other management tools are unsuccessful, the policy does allow the city manager to direct closures of campsites that are having the greatest impact on public health and safety. And that's where where you see in Emerson, what happened on Emerson in June, where the city closed the street. It was determined that public health and safety, the width of the road, and the some of the safety issues that had been identified with that campsite were, it was too dangerous to let that continue. And so bringing back to how this applies to homelessness, and you've asked some really good practical questions. I'm sure you all may be aware of the point in time count, which is done annually as required by HUD. In 2021, the point in time count identified almost 1,100 adults and children homeless in Central Oregon, which is Crook, Deschutes, and Jefferson County. I think if you look in the data, about 900 of those were in Deschutes County, and 70% of those were unsheltered. You can see here that the data, I think, showed 776 people experiencing homelessness in Deschutes County were unsheltered on the night they were counted in January 2021. And unsheltered means they were living in cars or camping or living in other places not intended for human habitation.
Well, Elizabeth, would that count the camp that's located off of China Hat Road? Because that's in the county. Is that part of that calculation? Even though they have like an RV or a car, they're considered unsheltered?
I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if there's anyone who's got more experience with the point in time count, please feel free to raise your hand and chime in. But when I look at what unsheltered means to HUD, and again, when we're doing the point in time count, we're using the definitions HUD sets out, or the HLC is the Homeless Leadership Coalition, and those doing the count have to follow and categorize people based on the definitions provided by HUD. So that's the definition used.
And I can jump in just really quickly to say,
Lynn.
yes, Elizabeth is correct. Those folks would be, assuming that they choose to participate in the count, which is of course optional, they would be counted. The folks who don't get counted are people who are doubled up and not facing what HUD considers literal homelessness. So if you're sleeping on your buddy's couch, you are not counted in the PIC count. And there's a lot of folks who fit in that category as well. I think some of what we suspect in seeing some of the more visual houseless population recently is because a lot of those folks who were sleeping on their buddy's couch got booted when COVID hit, right? Because we didn't want any more people in our homes than we absolutely had to have when that started. So we're seeing that as one of the potential reasons that we're seeing more folks out is in situations like that. So.
In addition, even our shelters that we had to massively reduce their capacity because of COVID too. So that also put more people out on our streets. And once you are out on the street, it is much more difficult to get into any kind of place where Bethlehem Inn fits what you are capable of doing, if that makes any sense.
Thank you,
Thank
Rachel.
you.
That's a good reminder. And I see Councillor Campbell's hand raised. So you have the floor, Councillor.
You're being quite generous with your time for me today. I really appreciate it. I'm just curious when the numbers from last month will come out.
So typically those aren't released publicly till about May is when we get preliminary numbers, because they have to be sort of acknowledged in some way by HUD, if that makes sense. That's not the right terminology, but they, they all have to be submitted and processed, et cetera. So typically May, June timeframe to keep an eye out, and the Homeless Leadership Coalition will probably submit a press release. So we'll probably find out more, but I'm happy to forward those along to this group when they do get released.
Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands. So Elizabeth.
Thank you, Cindy. So just the last point, I'm sure you all can read graphs probably better than I can, but you can see on the left that since 2017, the numbers of folks counted in the point in time count has been rising steadily. And it was in 2021, there was a 13% increase from 2020. You can see that's pretty consistent back, another 13 or so % increase back several years. And that's, again, thank you, Rachel and Lynn, for providing some of that context. So, that's the legal framework, and then the on the ground numbers of what does homelessness look like in Deschutes County through the PIT count, through the information we can get through the PIT count. I think I forgot to say, at our latest count, we had about 280 shelter beds in Bend, and that includes several beds added with COVID emergency funding and temporary beds in 2021 that may or may not last after that emergency COVID funding is used up. So, and I think this is where Carolyn will pick up the torch and carry it forward, but other city efforts in response, within this framework and in response to those numbers we were just talking about are to increase shelter and transitional housing capacity, both through your work as funders and through development code changes, which you've probably also heard about, working with community partners to keep people in their homes and increasing the affordable housing supply. And then next steps throughout this year of 2022, my office will be working with other city staff and city councilors to develop city code provisions on unsanctioned camping in accordance with the laws that we've just been discussing and trying to solve some of those riddles we've been identifying. And that will involve a public process of some kind. We're still at the very beginning stages of what that process will look like to develop that code. And watching sort of what other cities in Oregon have done to make sure that we're learning lessons from other places. And I'll turn it over to Carolyn by saying, we at the city have purchased through state and federal recovery dollars and Project Turnkey, the warming shelter on 2nd Street and a shelter on Division Street. These as the Shepherd's House and the former Bend Value Inn. And so that is some of the work to try and increase the bed count and expand options. And
Thank you so much.
Carolyn had to step away, but she is going to be back available a little around 4 o'clock. I don't know if we wanted to take a break or if there were additional questions that we might have before Carolyn joins the group again at 4.
Or I can do staff report if that's after the questions are, yeah.
Looks like
I can see everyone now, so I can see Kathy that has her hand raised, but I'll also let you call on people, Cindy. Sorry, don't want to step on your toes.
You're fine. Go ahead, Kathy. Thanks.
So this isn't a question, it's an observation. And at the chart that Elizabeth showed pretty much mirrors the increase in rental costs that the city of Bend has seen during that exact same time. And I think we can't ignore the fact that we are losing naturally occurring affordable housing in this community, and that it has a direct correlation for people who have been kicked out of their rentals because they can't afford rent, is contributing to some of the less typical homeless that a lot of people envision. There are people who are still working but simply can't afford a place to live. So it's more of an observation on my part. I'll get off my soapbox.
Kathy, just to back that up, there is national data. There are national data that support that. And the statistic that I've heard thrown about most often is that for every 10% increase in rent nationwide, there is a corresponding 13.5% increase in the homeless population. Obviously, that's national. There's a lot of intricacy in what that could look like, but I do think that there is a pretty substantiated correlation between the two. And as we know, there are many other factors, but I believe that to be partly the case in Bend as well. So.
Thank you for that. Well, if Carolyn is going to be back around 4, if the chief of police doesn't mind hanging out, or while we do staff report, we could do staff report. There are a few updates for us and some dates coming up. If no one's opposed to that, I say that's a great idea.
Great. I'll jump in. So a couple of upcoming dates. We have a lot going on, y'all. You have made us busy, which is exactly where we want to be. So this is good. The first is that on Monday is a new shelter code that is sort of intended to help us fulfill our obligation under the law to allow as many shelters as possible in Bend to meet the need, I'll say. And so that shelter code will have a public hearing on Monday. And so Kathy Austin was going to give a very brief summary, if that's okay. She's been participating on a steering committee to help develop that code, and I thought she would be the best. And then I think if it's okay, Kathy, I'll just encourage this group to watch that hearing, if that's okay, on Zoom at the Planning Commission in preparation for the potential to weigh in at council when it gets to that level. So Kathy, take it from there, if that's all right.
Thanks. Yeah, we worked for almost a year, meeting, I guess, 8 times. And I also sat in on the Planning Commission's workshop on this issue. And Lynn gave a great presentation on that, as well as, oh gosh, I forgot the planner's name.
Pauline.
Pauline and
Susanna.
Susanna.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Susanna. So I think that was recorded if anyone wanted to go back and see that presentation. But basically, I think a lot of our community was unaware that the legislature passed the supersiding ordinance, which basically said you could put a homeless shelter anywhere with virtually no restrictions. And actually, the Veterans Village, I believe, took advantage of that to find its place and limit the amount of other restrictions on it. And so what our task was to come up with rules and regulations that would take up from when this expires this year, of instead of it being you can do anything anywhere, is creating rules and regulations on how many people can be in what size lots in what neighborhoods, so that basically less people could be housed in the lower residential areas and more people could be housed in the higher residential areas. There were setbacks, fencing requirements, parking requirements, sewer, facilities required, and so forth. In other words, putting all the rules in place that really should be there to protect our community and be respectful of where these were to be located. I think it's important for the community to know that very few are going to come forward. There's not enough people actually providing the service to, like Neighbor Impact or others, to run a managed location. I think that the community at large tends to think of the worst possible outcome and fear that there's going to be a homeless shelter right next to their home, when in fact, there's very few places that there's opportunities to locate. But at any rate, we also, as a part of all of those regulations, we are allowing people on a limited time basis who can provide sewer hookups and utilities to RVs to park on their driveways. So it might be that some of the people that are on Hunnell or other locations might find a host to host their RV on their own private property for 6 months, and it can be renewed. So it might help to disperse some people who do have an RV. So it's a very comprehensive code. It addresses every zone in the city, and I think we did our best. And it's also important to note that when this is approved, if changes need to be made, they can be made. It's our best effort at this point. And I hope that everyone on our group will be supportive. I spoke on behalf of our group and said that we were supportive. So please correct me if you're not, and feel free to speak your mind at the Planning Commission. But I think it's something that we all should support because it's going to make a very difficult situation better. And that's the goal.
Thanks, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy.
So I do, Heather had a question, like Cindy, if that's okay.
Just a comment. I went and viewed the recording of that meeting, and Kathy did a fantastic job. And I really, and it occurred to me, I watched also the City Council work session and then the discussion at Planning Commission that, these various depths or levels of these discussions are occurring in different places, and it's almost necessary, for us to kind of go and listen into these conversations to get the larger picture. That's sort of the takeaway I've been having with this. So, but it's also encouraging that the conversations are occurring in so many places, and that the community is taking these concerns seriously and really trying to address them. So, but thank you, Kathy, for representing us.
I do hope that some of you have something better to do on Valentine's Day than attend the Planning Commission hearing, but we would love to see you, of course. You will feel the love from me if you do tune in. We also have on Wednesday, the Affordable Housing Fund recommendations going to City Council Wednesday of next week, and are still looking for a volunteer. If anybody's interested in that, please let me or Rachel know if that's okay, or feel free to volunteer at any point. That will be part of the main meeting. The main meeting starts at 7 o'clock. And this would be part of the regular agenda, which happens typically sometime after 7:30, I'll say. So please let us know if you want. It's all virtual at this point, so you could just sort of tune in, say your thing, and go. And of course, like always, we will prepare you with talking points and whatever background information you need to know. In addition, and hopefully somebody will let me know if Carolyn jumps back on and I'll stop talking, but in addition, we have the Community Building Subcommittee. That's a subcommittee of council that will hear a little more about the property tax exemptions that you all were introduced to at some point recently, and sort of the work that we've been doing both with a work group and with the other taxing jurisdictions on what the staff recommendation to council would be. So this is just a check-in point with the community building group on property tax exemptions. You're welcome to attend that. That's February 23rd. There's been a lot of good discussion about short-term rentals recently, and I think some of you may have seen, we sent out a survey to all short-term rental owners in the community, just asking why do you have a short-term rental? What is the purpose? What do you do with it? How often do you use it versus others, etc. And so we'll be talking with council in a work session on March 2nd at that meeting about short-term rentals and what they might like to do on that policy, if anything. So really just looking at data and trying to distill sort of what we're seeing in the community, et cetera.
So Lynn, real quick, I see Kathy's hand up, and then I had a question. Is the city going to make the survey results public for people to see the results? And if so, do you know the time frame? I know it's very involved putting a survey result together with all the comments, but do you know any information about that? And then if you answer that, and then Kathy, you can ask your question.
Yeah, so I will know a lot more tomorrow because we have a planning meeting tomorrow to really hash out this presentation and figure out next steps. But I would imagine that by the March 2nd, that will be public. I believe that's going to be part of the presentation. So I'd say look for it by then, if not before. And we are trying really hard to get all of our info uploaded to the council website ahead of time, including presentations for council meetings. So know that all of city staff is trying really hard. Dina is doing her best to corral, the 3 others in the housing department that you see on this on this Zoom to get all of our stuff uploaded in time, et cetera. But do know that that stuff should be posted about a week before the meeting, including PowerPoints. And then
Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I hear from a lot of constituents that they feel that this is a huge, huge problem, denying people the opportunity to either rent these houses or even buy them. And I don't know if that's really true, if it's an impression or if it's real. And I'm hoping that there'll be some data presented at this meeting. And then just wondering if one of the options is to put a moratorium on any new creations. And, you know, if it's identified that this truly is a problem, if the council is going to take some action that doesn't violate law in terms of taking, but does something significant to change the situation.
Great questions. And I think that that's kind of the $1 million questions that we're facing right now. Council has indicated that they don't have a set outcome. They really don't. They want to see the data and want to see how the data interact and what's really going on. And I'll say, you know, we were really looking for information like, you know, could you have purchased this home if it wasn't for the short-term rental ability, you know, or why are you using this? Do you see this as your retirement home, for instance, versus just an investment? You know, what are those sort of factors that went into that? Because we are aware that there are a number of permits that have not for the whole house, but for a room. And that is somebody's primary residence. And more than I expected of our short-term rental permits are for, or licenses are for that. So I'm really trying to get to those numbers and distill, you know, could any of these be anywhere near affordable range? What would happen if, and try to bring all of that information forward so that we can have a good discussion. I don't know, honestly, if council, I mean, some decisions that, seem like they might have kind of an expected outcome. I don't feel that way with this one, honestly. I think that they're really looking for discussion. My sense is that there will be some differences of opinion on council, which is makes for interesting discussion. So I would just encourage this group to tune in. We can give a recap after that work session as well. But I do believe council, when they say that they don't have an expected outcome, they want to find out more. And then the last sort of event that I wanted to mention is March 16th, which we anticipate having the contract for the navigation center to be in front of council on that evening. So once again, another step in this continuum. And so March 16th, so pretty much any meeting between now and April will have something to do with housing, maybe forever, I don't know. One other announcement for this group is that we got this announcement from HUD, but it's actually an OHA announcement. There are free, any community-based organization, which has a very broad definition, can order test kits and PPE from OHA for no charge. So I'm going to send that email potentially out to this group after, and then Dina and I are trying to figure out how to get it onto the committee webpage so that people can click, because there's a live link that you can click through to order the test. So please help us get the word out if you know of community-based organizations, nonprofits, folks doing housing work, et cetera, or services work. If they want tests and PPE, that is free. So that's good news. Staff, anyone else? Any other announcements for staff report that we haven't gotten to? Okay, and Rachel, did you have a chance to text Carolyn? Do you know if she's?
I don't, but I can hear her, so I'll be right back.
Okay.
Now's the time to ask the police chief anything. Usually I get 100 questions when we have blank time.
Can I ask you a loaded question, maybe?
Yes, let's go. Yes, let's do that.
I know what your answer is. So when one is entering a roundabout, is it necessary to stop at a yield sign or just yield?
Oh, please don't stop at yield signs. Unless there's actually a car that you're going to run into. The point of roundabouts and yields is to merge quickly. The best show, I can't remember the name of the show, but it's really all about watching anything that happens in France. Like the roundabouts there are amazing, right? That's what I hope for here. It's this merge idea, but I realize it's not a US typical thing to have, and we struggle with it sometimes. And sometimes some people more than others, but yes, it's a challenge. Merge, yield, that's it. Not a stop, especially if no one's there, because then you just risk getting rear-ended because, you know, people behind you think you're going to yield, not stop.
Thank
We
you
do
for
provide-
indulging my soapbox. I
Yeah,
really
they-
appreciate that. I'm gonna make you answer that question in public as often as we present together.
Is this like honestly ask the police chief anything we want? Time?
I mean, until we have
What?
time, I don't know.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
He's
or wait for
never
anything
gonna
else?
come back again. Y'all have to be nice to him.
Yes.
Come on.
Well, I have a question. I have a debate question. So if you're walking your dog must be leashed in leashed areas, which is almost predominantly all over the city. What if you have your dog on an electric collar, not leash, I'm sorry, but an electric collar,
Like the
which
shotgun?
you have the controller, which is essentially having your dog on a leash because the dog will come right back to you in theory. So is that considered having your dog on a leash if you have your dog on an electric collar?
No.
Okay, I won. Yay, thank you.
So your dog must be leashed everywhere in the city except for the 7 authorized off-leash parker areas. So
And a
I
leash
think
must be
people-
like a tether. It
and it
can't be
actually has to
something
be a
electric.
leash. The idea
Needs
is,
to be a
I
tether.
mean, some dogs, very, very thick-headed dogs, I've had 1 or 2 in my life, seem to be able to fight through some of that electrical pulse sometimes when they decide they really want to bite something.
Exactly.
So
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Um, yeah. So I think it was Boulder, Colorado. You can take your dog to be certified in a third party like dog trainer. And if your dog gets certified, it gets to wear a special collar, I think it might actually, red is not the right color, but a big bright collar that tells everybody this dog doesn't have to wear a leash. This dog went to 2 years of obedience school and passed the law. How about we do that?
Well, I'm not the maker of laws. I'm just the enforcer.
I was
So
gonna say, who's in charge around here?
Oh my gosh. That's
Great news is Carolyn is here.
I was gonna say, let's
goodness.
save for Chief Krantz from,
I have some
ask a
strong feelings
question.
about dog licensing, so let's start there.
awesome.
Chief Krantz, thank you so much for fielding all of the crazy questions and your patience with us. Carolyn, welcome. We just worked through Elizabeth's presentation on the legal framework. Really, really fantastic questions from this group. And so at this point, I think we're ready to pivot to how is the city implementing our strategy within the legal framework that we have set up. As you know, Chief Krantz is here to answer any number of questions that we might have about the world, but hopefully primarily on this topic from this point forward now that you're here. We did get a number of great things answered in the meantime. So with that, I'll hand it off to you, if that's okay, Chair King.
Totally is. So I mean, we can do this 2 ways. I have a formal presentation. I bet that this group knows like those slides by heart at this point. You've probably seen them at multiple community meetings, the shelters we have underway and some of the tactics we're taking. So I'm happy to show some slides really quickly or just take questions, whatever's going to be the most helpful for this group. I want to give you the information the way you need it rather than here's the way we deliver it every time. So if we can kick off with questions, I'm happy to start there. Or if we get stuck and we need to fill time, I'm happy to use PowerPoint slides.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. We did kill some time to work the schedule. I'm pretty visual. If you wouldn't mind putting the slides on the screen as you go through. I don't have a photographic memory yet, so I know I've seen these, but I don't mind seeing them again, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. Hang on one second. So I'm just going to try to use just the one slide. So is that coming up for everybody? Just
Yes.
the one? Okay. So these are all of the things that the city has underway. We've been doing a regular monthly every other week update to council that Councilor Perkins has been offering. And this sort of says like, here's what we're doing to get the shelter beds underway. Here's what we're doing to address the right-of-way concerns. And then here are the things that we're doing that are a little bit more long-term and hopefully allows us to make decisions and use resources efficiently. So I'll start at the bottom. Many of you have heard about, I really want to call this House Bill 1234. I'm just going to start calling it, but it's 4123. And it is Jason Kropp's bill that Eric King and Eric Kanzler drafted, which is the creation of a collaborative office between all 4 cities in Deschutes County and Deschutes County in an effort to deploy resources, humans and financial resources to better address the causes of houselessness, and then begin to put more housing on the ground, all different types of housing. But in a joint way. I think one of the things we've seen is like the city of Bend, for instance, will adopt in the very near future an update to our development code that allows shelters to be built in any part of the city. Are all the shelters going to be built in Bend because Redmond and Lopine and Sisters don't have those codes yet, right? And then, you know, one of the things we talk about is, so if the city of Bend does get some more clarity on how we're going to address unsanctioned camping in the right of way, well then, because Redmond and Sisters and the rest of Deschutes County don't have those rules, so we're only gonna, you know, so there's really this idea of collaborative nature. There's also the fact that Oregon is 49th in the country in terms of funding and mental health and behavioral health services generally, making Deschutes County no exception to that lack of funding, and an overall kind of, there's these pots of money that are sitting that behavioral health agencies, behavioral mental health have access to, that cities or police departments or sheriff's departments don't have access to. But because Deschutes County is now prioritizing that, that means the social service providers in the cities in Deschutes County don't have access to those funds. So how do we begin to understand those pieces? The city's also collaborating with the other mid-sized cities in Oregon. So it's basically anybody that's over 50,000 in population and not Portland. So Eugene, Medford, and really saying Salem, because those cities, us being really the leader, we have put more affordable housing units, thanks to you and all of your predecessors, on the ground per capita than Portland. But there's so much money going to Portland. And so same thing, look, you know, it's really great that every smaller city in Oregon got a turnkey grant. That's great. We've got acquisition now. State of Oregon, how are you going to fund these? So really looking long-term about what does sustainable funding look like? How do we have joint proposals? But right now, when we do an operating contract, for instance, at any of our new shelters, we're relying on behavioral and mental health service and case management from the county. And what we're finding a lot of times is people will ask you all for the money from the city of Bend to pay Deschutes County for that case management. And I'm like, time out, no more. Like, we need an MOU. Like, where's our MOU with the county that says they're going to do this because they're the public and regional health agency? We're also seeing a change where some of the services at Deschutes County were offered by behavioral health, and now they're being offered by public health. And so that's going to be a gradual change to watch, and it'll be interesting to see how that enters into the collaborative office. So I'm moving from the bottom up. So the other thing we're doing is really looking at how we manage our right-of-way. You know, before 2019, 2018, I live north of town, so Hunnell Road has always been part of my stomping ground, and we owned a landscaping business for a very, very long time. We always had employees who lived on Hunnell Road at some point in their time working for us. So Hunnell Road's always been a place where you could safely spend the night if you didn't have a place, or if you got in a fight with your roommates and couldn't go home that night. Always been a place, and we always knew that the forests surrounding the city of Bend had lots of camping. The school always provided bus stops for those students to get back and forth to school. So that was always happening. But what we really saw in 2019 and definitely came crushing down on us in 2020 were loads and loads of community members using city rights of way for places to stay at night. And no surprise, a city that goes from 50,000 to 100,000 in fewer than 20 years doesn't have the rules that we need to be able to address that in a safe and humane way, and already from a person-centered approach. And then we also had laws that Elizabeth talked about that came onto the scene before we could even have responded to what's happening. So now that we know what the scene is, or at least Elizabeth and her team do, we're attempting to develop the rights of way rules and regulations so that we can provide more certainty to the people and the businesses that are adjacent to those rights of way, and then continue to provide good services and options to those who are using the rights of way for camping. So that it's underway. We haven't nailed it yet. We haven't adopted all the policy yet. But as you heard earlier, and I dropped off for a half hour, I'm sorry, but we still can enforce criminal activity. We still are making efforts to clean up those camps. We are using some of our local ARPA dollars that have been allocated to the city Bend to provide services to unhoused community members for those cleanups and that outreach. But before we ever got local ARPA funds, the city council allocated 1.2 million in general funds, 400 for right-of-way work, and then 800,000 for unhoused services work. So we had that money in the budget. It was always a priority of this council, and then the ARPA money has come in to supplement those funds. And then really the big body of work has been around this 500 shelter goal. And you can see the red one, that's the development code changes. So funny, like cities, our role as a city is to be permissive, right? Who's ever said that before? Sorry, Elizabeth. But our job is to permit things to happen in our city, to allow things that need to happen in our city. So if we need a trampoline park, guess what? We have a development code that lets us build a trampoline park. If we need multifamily housing, we have a development code that lets us. If we need a rectangle, we've got a development code that lets us put a rectangle in. But guess what? Like shelters were never allowed. And so we had this, 50 years of Oregon land use law, and never were shelters identified as needed housing, and never were shelters really highlighted as something that needed to be permitted. Like we need to be permissive about building that type of housing in our community. So our development code is catching up to the reality. And cities undoubtedly got squeezed between Oregon land use law and Martin v. Boise and the other rulings. And so now what we're saying is we're going to make some room in our development code in the Oregon land use laws to create the space for that housing. But as you all know, can't do it overnight. So here we are with development code. What this will do is allow more Shepherd's House to buy more property and convert to shelter. Bethlehem Inn will be able to do capital campaigns and buy more property and convert to shelter without the development code and the development process being the barrier to that development. The shelter code amendments, the development code amendments alone do not require or compel the city to build more shelters. So just because we allowed ADUs, we didn't start building ADUs. Just because we allow, single family lots to convert to fourplexes, we're not going out as a city and building those things. So the development code is just a permission for the market to build more shelters. And then you can see the work that we've done. So we have been talking about outdoor shelters. So now that I'm like working on screens, I'm going to turn my head because I don't have the slide memorized. But outdoor shelters have definitely been a conversation. We did issue an intent to award an outdoor shelter or contract or two to Central Oregon Villages. They're they're the new kid in town. They're connected to the group in Eugene, and they've got some storming and forming to do for sure as an organization. So we've issued the intent to award, and we've got some work to do with them before we issue the phase one contract. The phase one contract is the outreach. One of the things that's missing from this little equation is the location. As you all know, we had a series of locations identified for outdoor shelters. Some were more popular than others from members of our community. The Central Oregon Villages has indicated a preference for two of the sites, and they are not the one that is the least popular from the community. So we're trying to move forward on other locations for them. One is privately held, and then the other one's held by ODOT. And so we have the underlying land acquisition lease work going on at the same time that we're doing that. So miracles do happen. This could all come together very quickly, but I anticipate that it'll be the better part of the spring, March, and perhaps even into April as we get some of this online. But we're working on it. The goal there being that for those people who are not ready to come indoors quite yet, we provide a bridge for them from maybe living in their vehicle on Hunnell Road to maybe this outdoor shelter where they can begin to engage with case management services on a regular basis, follow some rules, and then think about what that journey to stable housing looks like for them. We have the Division Street Shelter is the turnkey, the property that we were able to acquire with the turnkey funds. So that's the former Ben Value Inn or the old Ben Value Inn or Ben Value Inn or BVI. We're trying to call it the Division Street Shelter. This is the one that the naming contest is open for. So Rachel and Lynn or Deanna could send you that link. Shelter McShelter Face already taken. Don't put it in. I'm sure it's been put in. So, but we are, we got money from OCF for the acquisition. We got money from OCF for the renovation. The final renovation plans are coming to us in the next couple days or weeks. And we expect the renovations to take place this summer, and then the turnkey hotel or shelter to open in the fall. But before then, we have a contract approved by council. We're just waiting for signatures from Neighbor Impact to run temporary operations at the 25 rooms that are available there. So it's going to be a great trial. Already today, we didn't have sheets to make the beds, even though we thought we got the sheet donation. So little things like this are coming up, but it'll be a great trial run for us as a city as we think about all the things that need to be in operating contracts as we embark on more shelter ownership and manager. The Navigation Center you've all been part of, we've done the intent to award that contract to Shepherd's House. The money that you all have talked about providing to Shepherd's House will extend the money that we've got from the state to run that Navigation Center. So provides a lot of security that shelter will be open 24 hours for at least 3 years, if not longer. And that's a level of stability that we've never had in this community before, to have up to 100 low barrier shelter beds available for people to queue on any given night and have access to housing. What we've really seen there is, I don't know, I'm probably overstating maybe for dramatization purposes, but the individuals who are accessing those services is just a broader and broader array of individuals who are coming. Now that the shelter's been open long enough, the word on the street is it's an okay place to go. And we are able to move, I think it's 9 households, it might be more than that, but 9 households that have been regularly accessing the only beds available at Shepherd's House are going to be able to move into the Division Street Shelter, into the hotel rooms there. And they are among the most medically fragile users of Shepherd's House. So really provides a better way for them to get back on their path to stable housing, and then opens up some beds at Shepherd's House because that is probably the best place for people who are living in unsanctioned camps to access more stable housing. And then we have the safe parking program. Can anyone give me another safe parking location? I need more parking spots. The 6 parking spots that have been run by Reach, like 12 families have come through and 12 families are in stable housing. And that looks different from every family. So it's not what you or I might think necessarily, but we've been really successful getting some capacity to Stacy Whitty and her team at Reach out Central Oregon, and then adding handfuls of more parking spaces are just going to make that program more and more successful. So I'll leave. I can leave it up for the conversation or take it down, whatever's comfortable for you all.
So Carolyn, I'll start the question or comment. So the safe parking, can you just describe briefly what qualifies as a safe parking area, or what someone could offer for that? What does it entail?
Yeah, really, it's any place you can legally park. So it could be, it's a couple parking spots at a church. It's a couple parking spots at a retail establishment. Maybe Ben's got some funny layouts. Maybe majority of your parking's on one level, and there's a handful of spots tucked in, and even your employees don't park there. And the goal really is that they're cordoned off, not really like cordoned off, but they're identified. Each vehicle is given an identifier. And so those are the vehicles that are allowed to come in. Guests are allowed, right? But they're not, you're not allowed to say like, hey, Lynn, I'm going to go to the Metallica concert in Eugene. Do you want to use my safe parking spot over the weekend, right? Like that can't happen. It's just my vehicle that's there. And sorry. And then They and what they're finding is that that individual is then choosing to say, well, these are the things that are stopping me from getting housing. So maybe I have an eviction, or maybe I keep applying for housing and I keep getting denied. Or maybe it is I can't get my medications, and so that's making it difficult for me to go to the appointments that I need to go to get into housing. So it's really providing that service. It's very low barrier, and it is, I would say, it's like low friction too, Cindy, to say that it's me determining the 6 or 7 things that I need to do to get into housing, and then it's someone checking in every morning or every other day, like, hey, you said you wanted to get thing number 2 done this week. How you doing? You know, oh, I noticed that you have your grandchild with you. How's that? Like, what can we do? You know, so I think it's just identifying the regular day-to-day barriers that stop us all from getting the things done that we wanted to do that day, and keeping us on track for whatever that goal is.
Great.
So
Thanks.
Carolyn and Cindy, I can provide some additional information about safe parking. So about a year ago, the City Council adopted changes into the municipal code that make this safe parking program available. 2 pre-existing elements of state law allowed for variations on what is now in our code that comprise the safe parking program. So one is an allowance for parking of up to 3 vehicles on private property. And that is religiously owned property, up to 3 vehicles can park, or business property, excuse me. And then the second program is what Carolyn has talked about, which requires a city permit and a program and supervision for both. Sanitation is required on the property, but the program is up to 6 vehicles, and the safe parking without a approval from the city is up to 3 vehicles. So they're slightly different. They have slightly different elements. They're both in the city code, and we have information about the program elements and the requirements for each on our city pages about homelessness.
Great, thank you. Kathy, I saw your hand raised and then you lowered it. Did you?
Well, I just wanted Carolyn or Elizabeth explained it a little bit more. It's not like just anybody can sponsor the parking. From my understanding, it can be an agency, like a public agency or a church, or, I mean, I think there's more restrictions. It's not like just anybody can have 3 parking spaces, but also providing the sanitary is a big thing.
Thanks, Kathy. So the overnight, the 3 vehicle parking is available. I just pulled up the code so I can talk more coherently about it. Is available to property owned or leased by a religious institution, nonprofit, or business. So neither of these programs are available on residential property that doesn't otherwise meet these criteria. So it's not available for homeowners. It's available for business property, property owned by a nonprofit or a religious organization. And then the transitional overnight parking accommodation is the one that is up to 6 vehicles and does require that case management, that check-in that Carolyn was describing. And then, as I said, both require sanitation facilities.
I think what's going to, once it gets approved, is one of our emergency shelter options is an individual can allow an RV or mobile home to be parked on their property, but they do have to provide sanitation. And that isn't in effect yet, but we hope that it makes it through Planning Commission and City Council and is one of the options that we were working on. And that would be anybody who has enough room on their property, who's willing to host someone, can do so for 6 months with, I believe we left it with 2 extensions, so.
Thank you, Kathy. I don't see any other hand raised, but I'm only looking at virtual. I'll scroll through the screen and see. Thank you, Carolyn, for that extra information. I don't see any other hands raised, so. Oh, Heather, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Thank you. So with the goal of 500 shelter beds, Carolyn, can you remind us what is the size of the gap right now? Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted. Yeah.
220. So we started the whole endeavor last July with about 140 shelter beds, the majority of which were at Bethlehem Inn and so High Barrier. The shelter beds that we had coming into July were the beds at Shepherd's House. Dawn's House had added some emergency beds with their RV program. Cascade Youth and Family had some emergency shelter beds. Those were the ones that we were counting in the community. So really no low barrier shelter beds, truly. And so the first 86 to come online were the ones at Bethlehem Inn, or sorry, at Shepherd's House with the low barrier shelter when we opened that back up. We opened it in the winter and then we opened it back up permanently in June. The safe parking beds that we've been able to offer, and the up to 30 in the 25 rooms at Ben Value Inn, there are physically 30 beds. So I guess you could theoretically have 60 sleeping berths. So it probably won't work out like that. So we've been calling 40 beds. So that gets us to about 280 beds. And most of the ones that we've added then have been low barrier, which is good. But yeah, we would still need 220 shelter beds to get to that 500 number. We think between the renovations that will happen at the 2nd Street shelter, the renovations that will happen at the Division Street shelter, and then potentially having access to a 3rd shelter location, and the outdoor shelter, we may be able to realize another 100. So maybe on the outside, 400 shelter beds by the end of the biennium. But that would still leave us 100 shelter beds short, which is why the development code changes sort of come in. And that allows the private market, nonprofits, churches, others to say, oh, wait, we could open the winter shelter or a permanent shelter at the church in the building we're no longer using, or whatever that happens to be.
Thank you for that. And I recall I had watched a couple of meetings recently, one of City Council work session where I believe the dashboard for the City Council goals was displayed, which I was really impressed with because I'm also visual. I don't know if everyone on this committee has seen that dashboard, but there were some nice visuals on the housing progress and the shelter beds and where those beds were. So I don't know if we have time to see that.
I'm going to pull it up. I'm trying to pull it up as you're talking, Heather, but I can't listen and do anything at the same time, but hold on.
Carolyn, I'm also on it. So if you want me to just share my screen, if that's easier.
Yeah, if you have the shelter bed one to open it up, that's great.
So I'm going to start just to show you all how to get here, if that's okay with, okay, can you all see that? All right, so if you are on the Bend, Oregon homepage and you go to the council meeting link, over on the left side, you will see something called council status. Actually, maybe I'll just go back, I'll show you. So up here at the top, it says council meetings. This is on the council meeting page, but this is what will show up on the front page anytime you click council meetings, you get to this page. And over here on the left, it says council goals status reporting tool. Hopefully y'all are following. I'm seeing a lot of blank stares, but we're going to carry on, and then I'll send you the link in the follow-up email. So here's the council goal report card. So here's all the things that we're working on. And then you can click through to housing. It's going to take a sec to load. But we have a pretty amazing data and GIS team. So they make all of this look really good. So really fun stuff in here. And I would encourage you to just mess around with that council goal status tool, because there are some fantastic resources in there generally. So this is something we've been talking about a lot, is the complete units versus unit type being constructed, and how we've shifted from primarily single family to multifamily currently, and different things like that. Here's some trends over time. And then here we get to houselessness. Sorry, Carolyn, I'm taking a long way, but I want to make sure that these folks know how to get there. So here, I believe, Heather, this is what you were referencing a second ago. So here's our year-round beds and sort of where they are, and you can scroll through all of this and click through and see different things. So please feel free to explore that, and I'll stick that in the email that I'm going to send to all y'all with dates and things as well of upcoming meetings. Carolyn, did you want to say anything else about this before I switch off my screen share? Oh, sorry, I see Councilor Campbell has a question. Is that okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Cindy. Carolyn, this whole meeting, oh my gosh, so many excellent presentations. Now, can we just we're going to have Lynn and Carolyn and Elizabeth and the chief go door to door, give these presentations, and voila! Problem. So much great information. Carolyn, you might have already said this. So you absolutely did say that we don't have as many shelter beds because of COVID. We just, frankly can't put people so close together. So when we're counting those new hotels toward the goal of 500, are we counting one person per room, or are we thinking that once we get rid of COVID, those rooms could be more like maybe even Bethlehem Inn, where it's 4 people per room in rooms that used to be hotel rooms? Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility. So right now, good job on the math, Councilor Campbell. Nice work. So that's where the 40 bed estimate is coming from for the Division Street shelter. Is that feels like with 25 rooms, if we put one human in every room, it would be 25 beds. But a lot of households have more than one human, and so that's where we've been. So it's a parent and a child or a couple kind of thing. Yes, I think when we get the renovations done at Turnkey and we get the renovation done at 2nd Street, and COVID becomes an endemic and not a pandemic, or becomes endemic. I don't think it becomes an endemic. Anyway, we will probably see a proposal from those 2 operators to use the rooms a little bit differently. But right now, these are the ways that we're seeing the space be proposed. So, by the end of the biennium, we hope to have 100 overnight beds at Shepherd's House, and then we hope to have 40 or so overnight beds at Division Street, depending on household size and who's in there at the moment. And so that's about where we're headed. But you're right, in terms of long-term, could be slightly higher.
Thank you very much. Great.
But not high enough is really the answer.
And in terms of this presentation going on a roadshow, Lynn reminded me shortly before we started, these all go on YouTube as public meetings. So the link is available or will be available to share, and everyone can learn about Martin v. Boise and what to do at a roundabout and with a dog leash.
Yes, we diverged from some normal conversation to some more entertaining spots today. So thank you for that.
With that, I'm not sure if there's anything else, any other questions, or Carolyn, if you had anything else to share, or staff on the presentation. Just so many thanks to Carolyn, to Chief Krantz, to Elizabeth for coming and joining us today and fielding all sorts of questions that you may or may not have expected. It's always fun to present with all of you. Really appreciate your time and making this happen. So thank you. And with that.
That also means kudos to you, Lynn, and to Cindy for putting together such an interesting and valuable meeting where we can get and share information. And, I just want you all to go on the road show. The questions you're asking are so good. Yes, I will be sharing the video of this meeting. Thank you so much, everybody.
So as most of you know, I sometimes get to be the figurehead for these discussions, but the actual work happens by other folks who are also being shown on the screen. So I just wanted to recognize Rachel and Amy for really pulling this together. They're the ones who did the work and told me what to say. So here we are.
Yes, thanks. It's a collaborative effort for sure. Yes. So with that, since we've done the staff report in the middle of the meeting, I'm going to open up if there's any additional discussion or questions from the committee, anything that popped in your head. If there's nothing else, then meeting is adjourned and everyone can have a wonderful rest of their afternoon. Thank you. Meeting adjourned. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you all.